So we're back in the Psalms today. We've got to Psalm 26. One of the, can I say, great joys of being a school governor is that occasionally I get to be involved in a permanent exclusion panel. It doesn't happen very often, fortunately, but just before Christmas I had the joy of actually having to chair one. Unfortunately, the guy that normally does it had decided to go on holiday to Australia, and I was left in the lurch. And so I had to chair this panel. And everything seemed to go okay, as well as they can do in that kind of situation. And the decision was made, and we all went home. The parent decided to appeal. And what I didn't realize at that point was that the chair of the panel then has to take the flak. So I got summoned down to Euclid Street to face questioning by a panel. I was there with the head teacher, and there was all sorts of other people there. And there I was for probably the best part of 2.5 hours being grilled about the decision that we had made as an exclusion panel. And was it right or was it wrong? The outcome was that they decided that our decision was wrong. Some of the points they raised, fair enough, we didn't get it completely right. But some of the points we were very upset about, because they were questioning a little bit about what we did and why we did it, and they didn't believe what we had said. I don't know about you, but how do you feel in those kind of situations when you are criticized for something that you're doing? Particularly something that you're doing that you believe to be right. How do you respond? How do you deal with that? It's very difficult, isn't it, to do that sometimes? Because that kind of inward kind of compulsion to think, why? Come on, can't you see it? I've got this right, why can't you see it? And we tend to kind of want to fly off of the handle sometimes. And we want to say, come on. That's the kind of situation David was here facing in Psalm 26. We're not actually told the actual occasion. And if you read various books about this psalm, you will see people come up with all sorts of different ideas about when this actually happened. But we don't know exactly what it was. But what we do know is that David was under pressure. David was facing difficulties because of the position that he took. His opponents were bringing some kind of accusation, some kind of criticism about him, such that David cries out to God in verse 1, "Vindicate me, vindicate me." David wants justice. David wants things to be put right. David wants his reputation to be defended. And he cries out to God because he has nowhere else to go. "Vindicate me, Lord." The question that I want to ask this evening is, how can we live a life of integrity when the world is against us? How can we live in a way that honors what we believe to be true when the world is against us and has different ways, different ideas, different ways of working, and all sorts of things come against us? How can we do that? How can we maintain our moral principles without and remain whole and complete, and not kind of get drawn away from them. And that might be a position that you're facing this evening. I don't know. You might be in a position at work, or you might be in a position in a community organization that you're in, that you feel under pressure to do something that you know maybe isn't right. Just this week at work, I was asked by somebody whether I could gift aid a donation for them. They were wanting to pay for an invoice. It's not really what gift aid is for. The easy thing to do, isn't it, is to kind of just go along with that kind of thing. But how do we maintain our integrity when things come pressing in upon us that maybe are against what we believe and what we hold to be true? I think David gives us three indications here about how we can do that. And the first one is that we can continue to walk in God's way. We can continue to walk in God's way. David says some amazing words in verse 1, and he repeats them in verse 11. I have led a blameless life. God, vindicate me. Why? Because I have led a blameless life. I don't deserve this. Vindicate me. Show that I am right. Does it mean that David was perfect? Does it mean that David never made any mistakes? Well, you only have to read the accounts of David's life in the two books of Samuel to know that that wasn't the case, was it? David did make mistakes. David did get things wrong. How then can he say, I have led a blameless life? But what we also know about David is David was a man who, when he did make a mistake, always sought forgiveness. He came and admitted that to God. He confessed that to God. And he then continued to trust him. He continued to walk with him. He always came back to the place where he trusted in God. So much so that what does God call David? He calls him a man after my own heart. I wonder whether the same can be said for you and I. Can you say, I lead a blameless life? It's a real challenge there, isn't it, for us as we kind of look in at ourselves, we look in at what we do, we look in at how we behave, how we speak, how we act, even how we think. Is it blameless? But what I find even more surprising is, in some ways, is what then David goes on to say in verse 2. David says, yes, I've led a blameless life, but Lord, have a look. Have a look. See what I have done. And he uses three words there, depending on your translation. In the church Bible, it says, test me, try me, examine me. Or having the kind of building on one another, saying, God, have a look into my life. Test it out. Is what I'm saying true? Have I led a blameless life? Has anything that I've done, can we still call that blameless? One of the words has the idea of kind of taking out the impurity of when metal is kind of, you're trying to take the impurity out of metal and you put it through the refiner's fire. Another one is kind of just have a real good look at what I've done. Scrutinize my life. But it's not just what he does that David is asking God to examine. What does he say in verse 2? He says, examine my heart and my mind. Look at my heart. Look at my mind. Yes, we can see all around us, can't we? We can see each other's lives to some degree. We see what other people do. We hear what other people say. But what about God looking into your heart? What does he see then? When he looks in at the emotions that you have, the innermost things that you feel, that you experience, what does God see? And my mind, what does God see in my mind? Is that blameless? David was saying, calling out to God, yes, Lord, test me, try me, examine me, because I do lead a blameless life. And he goes on to say that I have always been mindful of your unfailing love. I've always lived in reliance on your faithfulness. You will see, Lord, you will see, God, that it is true. I continue to follow you. I continue to walk with you. I continue to lead that life which honors you. I wonder whether you would open yourself up in quite the same way. Do you say to God, examine my heart, examine my mind, see what is going on? I wonder what God would see if you did do that, if I did that. Would our words match our hearts? Would our actions be in line with what we are saying and with what we are thinking? Would he see someone who continues to walk in God's way? One Sunday, a pastor preached a sermon on honesty. The next day, he was going out and about, and he got on a bus. And he paid the fare, and the bus driver gave him back too much change. And during the journey, the pastor was wondering what to do in that kind of situation. What should I do with this? Should I kind of just say he's made a mistake and go off? What should I do? As he got off the bus, he went back to the bus driver. And he said, I think you've made a mistake. You've given me too much change. The bus driver smiled at him and he said, it wasn't a mistake. I was in church yesterday. You were speaking about honesty, so I thought I'd give you a little test. His words matched up with his actions. The pastor was a man of integrity. Do our words and our actions match up? And even more challenging, do our thoughts match up with our words and our actions? David could say, yes, I lead a blameless life. I wonder, can you say the same? But what can we do to help us to continue to live in God's ways? What can we do that will help us to be like David? Maybe to be like that pastor even. Well, I think it's fairly simple in some ways, but very difficult in others. We need to know God, don't we? We need to know what his ways are, because how on earth can we follow them? How can we continue in them if we don't know him and we don't know the way that he wants us to go? And therefore we have to be people who read God's word and who spend time with him. I wonder how often you do that. How often do you spend time reading the Bible? How often do you spend time talking with God? David in Psalm 1 tells us that blessed is the one who delights in the law of the Lord and who meditates on his law day and night. That person is like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season and whose leaf does not wither, and whatever they do prospers. We need to be connected to the river. We need to be connected. Our roots need to go down into the water of life, into Jesus, into God, into his word. We need to know him. We need to know what he wants from us. We were reminded this morning, weren't we? God is truth. We need to know that. How on earth can we follow him? How can we be like him if we don't know what that looks like? Let me encourage you, try and do that each day. Try and spend some time with God in his words. Spend some time talking to him. Yes, life gets busy. Life gets crowded out with all sorts of things that are going on. But how important it is to put some time aside to do that. It doesn't have to be for hours. It doesn't have to be for a long time. Great if you can. But let's make it a discipline, a habit of doing it continually. That we might continue in God's ways. That we might continue in his word. So that we do know him more and more. So we are to continue in God's ways. But the second thing David says is that we are to guard ourselves against ungodly influences. Guard ourselves against ungodly influences. That's what he goes on to say in verses 4 and 5. I do not seat with the deceitful, nor do I associate with hypocrites. I abhor the assemblies of evildoers. I refuse to sit with the wicked. I wash my hands in innocence and go about your altar, O Lord. David, does that all sound familiar to you? Do those words ring any bells with you? We've already thought about Psalm 1. What does it say at the beginning of Psalm 1? Blessed is the one who, what? Does not walk in step with the wicked, or stand in the way of that sinners take, or sit in the company of mockers. This was consistent in David's life. He sought to keep himself away from those who would lead him astray. He knew that if he spent time with these kind of people, he would be defiled. That his integrity would go because they were coming from a very different view of the world. He was blameless and he wanted to stay that way. And so David made a deliberate decision not to sit or associate with those that would lead him astray. You see, we're all influenced, aren't we, by the people around about us. Whoever that might be, we are influenced by them because we're spending time with them. And we need to be careful about the influence that they do have. This doesn't mean that we isolate ourselves. It doesn't mean that we're going to all go off tomorrow and go to a monastery or a nunnery and put ourselves away. Because again, as we were thinking this morning, we are in the world. That's the place that God has put us. But we are not of it, are we? And we need to do what we can not to allow the world to influence us. We need to make sure that when we need help, when we need counsel, that we get that counsel that points us to God. That we don't have this different kind of view that comes from those in the world who have a very different view of the way that we should live, the way that we should act, and what we should do. I wonder, when you need advice, when you're going through challenging times, maybe you are in a situation like David where you feel under pressure from those around you, from the world around you, where do you go for help? Who do you seek out for advice? Do you go to those who have a different worldview? To those that we would call in the world? Or do you go to those who are walking with God? David realized that if he spent too much time with the deceitful and the hypocrites and the evildoers and the wicked, that he was putting himself in a dangerous place. And he wanted to guard against that, because he knew that if he didn't guard that, then he couldn't say that he lives a blameless life. He couldn't ask God to vindicate him, because he would be drawn in to what was going on all around him. And we need to do the same, don't we? We need to be careful about who we associate with. We need to be careful about who we seek advice from. There is a time and there is a place to talk to those that have a different view of the world. But ultimately, we need to be seeking what God wants. And we're not going to get that from people who don't acknowledge who God is. And if we want to continue in his ways, then we do need to guard ourselves against ungodly influences, just as David did. Because we see, as he goes on to say, what that ends up like. Do not take away my soul along with sinners, he says in verse 9. Don't take away my life with those who are bloodthirsty, in whose hands are wicked schemes, whose right hands are full of bribes. If we get drawn in, if we get defiled, if our guard goes down and these things come in, then it's not a great end. And David wants to guard himself against that, because he knows that he wants to continue in God's way. And thirdly, we see that the third way of helping to live a life of integrity is to make the most of going to church. Because that's what David does. He says, I wash my hands in innocence in verse 6 and go about your altar, Lord, proclaiming aloud your praise and telling of all your wonderful deeds. Lord, I love the house where you live, the place where your glory dwells. That's what David loved. He recognized that he needed to come and seek God's forgiveness. He needed to be clean when he came into God's presence. But that's where he loved to be. That's where he wanted to be. The place where God is. Do you love coming to church? Do you love coming each Sunday? Do you make the most of the opportunity of being in a place where God is? Obviously, in David's time, God's presence was very much found in the tabernacle. And that was the place that you went to meet with God. We have the privilege of having God live within us. But there is still that place when we come together, that we can help and support and encourage one another as we sing his praises together, as we recognize who God is together. But if we're honest, there are times when we don't want to come, aren't there? There are times when we just would much rather just stay at home. Maybe carry on doing what we're doing. Maybe we don't like the subject that's being talked about. Maybe we don't like the person who's speaking or leading. Maybe the music turns us off. All sorts of reasons can be why we just don't want to come. But David tells us that the house where God lives is the place where you really meet with him. As I was getting ready for this, I read of a pastor who had his, in his congregation, he had a lady who was completely stone deaf. She couldn't hear anything that was going on. This was some time ago. And yet, every week, she was there. She couldn't hear what was going on, what was happening, but she was there. And one day he went up to her and he asked her, and was able to communicate with her, why'd you come? Because you're not getting anything from the time of worship. You're not getting anything from what I'm saying. Why do you come? And she answered this. This is what she said. She said, though I cannot hear you, I come to God's house because I love it and would be found in his ways. And he gives me many a sweet thought upon the text when it is pointed out to me. Another reason is because I'm in the best company, in the most immediate presence of God and among his people. I'm not satisfied with serving God in private. It is my duty and privilege to honor him regularly in public. When I read that was a real challenge to me because, let's be honest, sometimes I don't want to come. But yet, this is the place, above all other places, where we meet with God. And if we want to live a life of integrity, if we want to live a life that honors him, then we need to be with him. And we need to spend time with him. And this is the place where we meet him most. Yes, we need to spend time with him on our own. We need to read the Bible each day. We need to pray. But there is something different about coming together to do that. And we need to recognize what a privilege it is that we can come each week and spend time with God in his word, hearing what he's saying to us, singing his praises, doing it together. And at the end, David is looking forward in verse 12. After he repeats in verse 11 that I've led a blameless life, deliver me and be merciful to me. He says, my feet stand on level ground. In the great congregation, I will praise the Lord. You see, David is a man of integrity. Why? Because he continued in God's ways. Because he guarded himself against ungodly influences. Because he enjoyed meeting in God's presence in the tabernacle in church. And he knows that that's a foretaste of what is to come when he will be with the great congregation, with everybody praising the Lord. And the same can be true for you if we turn our eyes upon Jesus. And we're going to sing that now just to as we close, to remind ourselves that we are turning our eyes upon him because he is ultimately the one who will keep us and guard us and watch over us And he will be the one that vindicates us if we're going through really tough times. He is the one that will deliver us, because he is a God who loves us and has mercy upon us. Stand if you're able to, and as we sing, turn your eyes upon Jesus.